Welcome to our Conversational AI Reading Group. Today we are excited to have Rafa from University of Antioquia talking about a speech language and movement processing to model Parkinson disease. If you have any question during the talk, please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Without any further delay, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Puna, for inviting me here. I'm very excited to give you this talk, and please feel free to ask at any time if you want, or at the end of each session. Anyway, it's fine with me. Okay, so my name is Rafa. It's easier just to call me Rafa, and I am affiliated with GITA Lab at the University of Antioquia. And I've been working with them for about 15 years already. Okay, this is the agenda that I took to here. So a brief introduction, then some classical approaches, then why to do speech and movement analysis. Then I will move to a slightly different topic, which is about transitions in facial expressions. And then I will be back to speech and language analysis, and then a summary and an outlook. Okay, so why to work on Parkinson's disease? The main reason is because it is a global problem. It is estimated that more than 6 million of people suffer from Parkinson's disease. And that means every 9 minutes there is somebody diagnosed with Parkinson's disease just in the US. And there is about 60,000 new cases every year. So it's a global problem, and nobody is except to suffer from it. Another reason is because the market for its treatment is exponentially growing because many people is suffering from the disease, and it has to do with the longevity of the population around the world. So this is another reason why it is interesting to work on it, not only because the costs is growing, but also because if the cost is growing, it means that the society has to pay for it. So we need to find solutions, ideally as cheap as possible, to be able to manage this problem. Now, if we analyze the problem from its internal functioning in the brain, it is something that happens in the basal ganglia. And can you confirm that you are seeing my mouse pointer, please?
Yeah.
Okay. And that means that several other areas can also be affected, not only the basal ganglia, which is the typical described in the literature. One is the motor area, which is the common that everybody see people with Parkinson's disease and recognize them because of the trembling or the freezing of gait symptom. But also the Broca's area, which is in charge of the speech control, gets also affected. And the Wernicke's area, it has to do with language comprehension and production, which is less studied, or let's say it started to be studied from about 10 years now. But it is definitely affected because it's exactly around the basal ganglia area in the brain. Now, how can the society now currently address this problem? So typically, you go to the clinic, and then if something abnormal is happening, then they take two possible decisions. One is to do neuropsychological tests that typically are administered by experts who studied not only neurology, but also psychology, so neuropsychology. That means it's expensive and time-consuming. Another way to address the diagnosis process is via fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imagery, which is expensive. And the people and the societies, not all of them are able to afford that cost. And when I am saying about cost, it probably do not affect the area of Montreal. But if you think about the countryside of Canada, then that is the case. Not everybody, it is not possible to move all of the patients from the countryside of all of the countries to the big cities to do all of these examinations. Now, another reason why it makes sense to study the problem using different biosignals other than the fMRI or the neuropsychological tests is because if you see the evidence in the literature, there is an increasing trend of digital health technologies being used to address neurology related problems. Now, the good news is that cognition and speech, even though it's slightly growing, there is still a lot to do. And that is a good news for us as researchers. Okay, now let's talk about specific skills that are affected by Parkinson's disease. And I am showing here some examples of different skills: voice, gait, speech, handwriting, etc. So let me show you some examples. So this is a very old but well-known interview of Muhammad Ali.
That while everyone knows you suffer from Parkinson's syndrome, there is the damage to your brain has not affected your mental capacity at all. It hasn't.
I hope not.
You hope not? It has affected your movement. It has affected your speech. It has affected your facial expression, but it is not.
Okay, it is not necessary to listen to all of the interview, but now we saw that speech is affected, voice is affected, facial expressions are affected, even though he claimed or he hoped not to be affected yet. But of course, we can notice that he's trying to smile, but his smile is not natural at all. Now, let me play some sounds. This is in Spanish.
Ayer fui al médico. ¿Qué le pasó? Me preguntó, yo le dije, ay doctor, donde pongo el dedo me duele.
So this is more or less monotonic, which is what is way well documented in the literature. And this is in German.
Das Fest war sehr gut vorbereitet.
Now, this one shows what is called stuttering-like speech. And it is when the people or the patient repeats a lot of sentences or a lot of syllables during the sentence to be produced. Now, another area or another possible symptom is about showing emotions, which sometimes derives in depression. Like this is a transliteration of an interview that we did to a patient here. And he was saying, in the past, I liked to dance, but now I don't want to do it anymore. Or some of them typically say, I feel bad today, or I have lost the appetite today. And all of these expressions show abnormalities related to emotions and sometimes derive in depression. Okay. What is also impaired in Parkinson's patients is the semantics. And what we studied so far is that the production of verbs by Parkinson's patients is much less in motor verbs compared to the amount of motor verbs produced by healthy controls. And it affects the language production because then they struggle to find proper words when they are talking about trying to describe some scene or some history, some story. They struggle to find proper words to create the sentences. Also, the facial expressions get affected. If you see in the left side, that is a healthy person smiling and is a, let's say, natural expression. But in the right-hand side, you see a patient with Parkinson's disease and is trying to smile, but it's evident that he's struggling to control properly all of the muscles in the face. Now, if we see handwriting, we will observe, and I will show it later with some experiments, problems in the controlling the pressure of the pen. There is abnormal in-air movements. There is tremor, and there is micrographia, which is as typical symptoms described as you start writing, and then the size of your letters start to get smaller and smaller. And it's a typical symptom of Parkinson's people. In gait, you can also observe abnormalities, and you can also measure that. You can use these high-speed cameras if you have one of those. But if you don't, then there is a cheaper way of doing it, and that is with accelerometers and gyroscopes. Stick to the heel of the shoe, and then you can measure acceleration, velocity, position, tremor, all of these symptoms. Now, clinically, how all of these phenomena are evaluated. So there is several evaluation batteries in the clinical practice, and let's say the most typical one, the gold standard around the world, is called the Movement Disorder Society Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, MDS UPDRS for short. And it has several parts, and one of them is specifically focused on motor examination. And that is what we use in clinical practice when we evaluate our patients. And not because the other aspects are not interesting, but just because we don't have enough time to do all of the examination. And it includes the evaluation of the handwriting, the upper limbs control, the lower limbs control. It only has one speech item to evaluate speech production and only one item to evaluate depression. So if you want to study speech and depression, then you have to think of a different examination. But if you don't have enough time to do it, then you have to live with either the whole motor part of the scale or only one item for it. Now, let me show you some classical approaches that have been used to model Parkinson's symptoms. So for speech, just to make it clear for everybody, when we call that we are modeling the speech, that means we try to model how a person is speaking. So that means in the case of Parkinson's, we try to model dysarthric speech. In handwriting, we try to model micrographia, tremor, if we have access to dynamic handwriting movements, and rigidity. In gait, we try to model freezing of gait, postural instability, and bradykinesia. And in facial expression, we mainly model hypomania. Now, for speech, we typically model speech as a set of 4 different dimensions: phonation, articulation, prosody, and intelligibility. There is a 5th one, but I will talk about it later. Then what we do is we group different signal processing methodologies, and according to which phenomenon is intended to model, then we put it into either phonation, prosody, articulation, or intelligibility. Now, for phonation, we try to model harmonicity, periodicity, and regularity. And the aim is to model the process of the lungs to produce air, and then the larynx to control that air to pass through the vocal tract to produce speech. Now, for articulation, we focus on how the person is able, or whether the person is able to control the tongue, lips, jaw, and velum during the speech production. And when I'm referring to control, I refer to position, time, and energy. Because when you move the articulators, you have to make sure that the tongue is in the right position during the right time. And it opens for us as engineers many different options, because when we talk about position, then we are referring to a certain movement. But when we talk about timing, then we are referring to something that opens up the chance to model it with time-sensitive approaches in a very specific phenomenon like articulation. Now, for prosody, we try to model how the person is intonating while speaking. So we focus on modeling pauses, speech rate, time, and the control of the tone. And finally, intelligibility is to evaluate whether a person is understandable or not. and it means to count or to evaluate somehow the number of words, syllables, or phonemes that are correctly recognized by a machine or by a person. Now, let me show you this example of experiments that we did with phonation, articulation, prosody, and intelligibility. In this case, we worked with 100 people, 50 patients, and 50 controls. So that is probably some of you are aware of PCGita. This is the corpus that I'm referring to. So we studied this corpus, and this is the age distribution. So there is no any bias regarding age. This is the motor evaluation distribution. So you can observe that most of them are in the intermediate stage of the disease. And the time after the diagnosis, most of them are below 20 years of being diagnosed. So most of them are between 60 and 80 years old. Now, when we did phonation analysis in vowels, we obtained good results. But then the problem is that our team is known in the community because we always try to model something, but with interpretability for clinicians. And the problem is that humans do not communicate with sustained vowels. So, okay, the result is good, but it is not transferable to natural communication. When we see intelligibility results, those are not as expected. And one of the possible reasons is because any intelligibility evaluation will depend on your ASR system. So, and since this is Colombian Spanish, there is no Colombian Spanish corpus to train a good speech recognizer and so on. So there is some problems, let's say, behind using this technology. Now, when we focus on articulation, we see, or we found good results, 83% of accuracy. So we thought of, okay, let's see whether this result is transferable to other languages. Now we took a German and a Czech corpus. The German one has 88 patients and 88 controls, and the Czech one has 20 patients and 16 healthy controls. And then what we did was to try a system with one language and to try to test it in a different one. And this is what we found considering only the monologues. So we trained with Spanish, and when we tested in German, we found below 60% of accuracy. So this is this point. And in Czech, it was around 80% of accuracy. So since at least for German, the result was not promising, then what we did was, okay, that's expectable because Spanish is totally different to German. Same thing for Czech, but for Czech, the corpus is very small. So it's hard to make strong conclusions here. But then what we did was, okay, what if we show 10% of the data in German to the system, such that the system at least has the chance to observe some phonemes and some sounds of the target language. So we excluded them from the test set and put them into the train set. And then the accuracy started to grow, okay? We did the same when training with German and testing on Spanish, and then we found a similar trend. And then when training in Czech and testing in Spanish and German, there was some similar trend, but the results were not as strong as with the German. So probably the reason is because the German corpus is much higher than the other two. I mean, much larger. Now, since we also had the UPDRS score for the patients in the 3 languages, then we did the correlation between our models and the clinical evaluation, and we found, let's say, modest results. The best one was with Czech, and followed by the Spanish result. Now, the problem is that the MFDS UPDRS score is a wide examination, as I showed. It includes upper limbs, lower limbs, mental state. Speech is only one item. So probably to evaluate this clinical examination, only considering one item is not fair with the model. Then what we did was to see in the literature which evaluation protocols exist for dysarthric speech. And then we found this franchise assessment from the University of Sheffield.
So
Now,
maybe
when we
there is
were,
one question here,
yes,
maybe because
sure.
there's a question in the chat. How is the articulation measured here?
Okay. Oh, good question. Let me go back to here. In this case, I mean, articulation can be typically evaluated by measuring F1 and F2, and then you find the tilt in the spectrum and so on. But in our particular case, we focused on the transitions between voiced and unvoiced, and in the transitions from voiced to unvoiced. So onset and offset. And I will get back to this detail in a couple of slides, if that answers the question. Sorry, I cannot see the chat. Just to confirm that the person is happy with the answer. Chat here.
Yeah.
Okay. If there is more questions, okay, yes, thank you. Good. Go here. Then the problem of this evaluation scale is that it requires the patient to go to the clinic because it includes several swallowing tasks. Then we said, okay, no, we need a scale that can be used only considering recordings. Of course, what we wanted was to make use of all of the recordings that we had from several years, right? Then we introduced this modified FDA or modified franchise assessment, which is a subset of the original one, and it is focused on specific movement or control of specific parts of the vocal tract or the whole system involved in the speech production. So respiration, lips, palate, velum, larynx, tongue, and intelligibility. And then the total range of this new scale was is from 0 to 52. 0 means healthy control or totally healthy, and 52 means completely impaired. And then we did evaluation regarding the articulation features. Of course, we compared also with phonation and prosody, and we didn't find, let's say, as good results. But with articulation, we found an average of 0.70 correlation, which is promising, considering that we are not requesting the patient to come again to the clinic, and we are based only on recordings. And in the particular case of the PATACA evaluation, which is called DDK task or dialogokinetic evaluation, we found the best results, which makes sense because this subscale was designed for articulation evaluation specifically. And the PATACA test is the most accurate or most specific task to evaluate the control of the lips, the tongue, and the velum for P, T, and K, respectively. And then these are the plots of the correlations that we obtained. Now for handwriting, we considered a corpus with 39 patients, 39 elderly healthy controls, and also 40 young healthy controls, because we wanted to see whether aging shows an impact in handwriting. And for this we used a Wacom tablet, so we had access not only to the drawing but also to the position, acceleration, velocity, inclination of the pen, pressure, and so on. And then we created different models. This one, which is, let's say, the newer, let's say, for the community, is based on the drawing of this spiral. If you think of this spiral as an amplitude modulated signal, you can notice that what is changing is if you put this into a different system of coordinates, you can see that the result is a kind of sinusoid, but the amplitude is growing and growing. So we model this with a polynomial modulated by a sinusoid signal, and that was one of our features. We also considered nonlinear dynamics. So basically, we created what is called the state space. And for those who maybe are not familiar with it, if we take a sinusoid as an example, and you embed that into an embedded space or a state space, what you observe is a perfect circle, because one axis is the normal signal, another axis is the signal delayed by 1 tau, and the other axis is the same signal but delayed in 2 tau, tau being what is called the embedding delay. And then for a sinusoid, it's a perfect circle, but if you see for drawings of a healthy control, you can observe that there is let's say, a regularity in the drawing. If you see an elderly healthy control, there is also some regularity, but a little bit different compared to the young healthy control. But when you observe a patient, then you notice that the embedding space is contracted and more chaotic, if I may say. So we put everything together and we found very good accuracy results, but then we thought of, okay, how generalizable are these results? And are these tasks easy to administer? And then we were talking to other colleagues around the world, and we found that everybody are using different tablets to collect the signals, different sampling frequencies. Everything was different. So the generalization capability of this approach is hard to. Which models were used to get results? Okay. In this, we included information from position, speed, acceleration, pressure, and so on. And so we basically extracted frequency-related information from spectrograms of these kinematics tasks or measures. And for the geometrical, it was a comparison, let's say, of how deviated were these polynomial or in healthy controls versus, so A, B, C, and D were the parameters in healthy controls versus Parkinson's patients. And for nonlinear approaches, we basically measured the shape of all of these figures. So the distance between different trajectories, how regular are those trajectories, and also the entropy associated to these embedded attractors. If you want to see more details about these experiments, you may want to read this paper, okay? Which is written in slide 36. Okay, so there was several drawbacks to continue digging into handwriting. Now let's talk about gait analysis. In this case, I am only referring to the 4 × 10 meters walk task, which is the patient walks 10 meters, turns around, come back, another 10 meters, and then turns around, come back, another 10 meters, and then the last 10 meters. So this is called the 4 × 10 walk. And for these, we used shimmer sensors, which is these orange and white sensors, stick to this shoe. And to record the signals, we used the eGate system, which was provided by Astrum IT. It was a donation that we received from the University of Erlangen in Germany. Then we measured, we considered 45 patients, 45 elderly healthy controls, and 44 young healthy controls. And we measured different dynamics of how the shoe of the patient is moving while walking. So we specifically paid attention to this maximum altitude, this minimum amplitude, and the velocity of the movement. And then we created also the signals to analyze the cinematics of the time series, but also nonlinear dynamics, as in the case of the handwriting, and also stability, trying to imitate or to mimic what we observe in speech or in voice. When you do sustained phonations, then you measure temporal stability as jitter and amplitude stability as shimmer. Then we try to measure the same or similar, and we also found results above 80%. And additionally, when we were trying to see whether how impaired the patient was had some impact in the model, we found that there is a kind of trend. See, these orange squares are healthy controls, young. Then elderly healthy controls are these orange circles. And then all of the patients are here and are somehow sorted according to their impairment. PD1 means in the beginning of the disease. PD2, which is these orange stars, is in the second stage of the disease or in the intermediate stage. They are more spread because the corpus, let's say, is not completely separated into initial, intermediate, and advanced state. And these green stars are the more advanced patients. So there is some way of evaluating whether or how the disease is progressing using gait signals or these signals that we collected. Okay, now if there is no questions regarding handwriting and gait, I will move to speech and movement. And the reason is because we were obtaining reasonable good results, but then we were thinking, okay, why to incorporate other biosignals if the results with handwriting and gait are already good enough? And then we took this patient as an example. She had 43 as MFDS UPDRS score. She had a normal gait, normal handwriting. You can see that her writing is actually very nice. Normal speech, you can listen to her.
Yo en un día común y corriente me levanto, hago
So it's fluid.
el desayuno, después pensar qué hacer para el almuerzo.
So for those who know how to speak in Spanish, will notice that there is no problem in her speech. But when we recorded her, we found that the reason for this MFDS UPDRS score that high is because she was unable to control or to keep the neck stable and the left arm stopped while moving while doing the heel toe tapping task. And we also found another evidence in here. Sorry. Yeah. What we did was, according to the MFDS UPDRS, we sorted all of the patients that we have recorded, and she was in this position. So it was the intermediate to advanced position. But when we evaluated the dysarthria level of all of the patients, she was in the beginning. So what does that mean? It means that not all of the patients evolve the same in different biosignals. So it makes sense to incorporate more biosignals, because if we focus on only one or two, we maybe we lost several patients, or we lost some symptoms in several patients, which will introduce misdiagnosis, erroneous conclusions, and all of what it can derive in the clinical practice. Then, for the multimodal evaluation, we focus on transitions because, as I showed you in the speech, we already found some good results. And then we said, okay, why if the transitions in speech as a hypothesis are also transferable to transitions in gait, in handwriting, and even in facial expression production? And then we started to dig into that. And this was the main motivation. It was recorded 15 years ago. And we were recording patients while walking with a Kinect camera, and we observed that for them it is very hard to stop while they are walking, and it is very hard to start walking again. So the transition of the movement in gait is also a problem. And we said, okay, so maybe there is information actually in those transitions. Then for speech, what we did was to segment unvoiced to voiced and also voiced to unvoiced. And we took this as an example. This is a healthy control saying pa. All of this is pa. So this is a P sound, and then this is the vowel. And you can notice that there is a clear transition between the voiceless and the voiced sound. For a PD patient in an initial state, then there is more, let's call it information here in the left. For intermediate state patient, there is even more energy here. And if you see in a severe state, there is even more, actually way more than in the vowel segment. So there is information there. So we wanted to model that, and then we took these segments and we used it to feed a CNN network. I will show you later. In GATE, we observed exactly the same pattern, where healthy control is very clear the transition, where an initial state is not that clear, where intermediate either is not that, and for a severe is even harder to find the pattern of the transition. So we modeled the 3D accelerometer signals and the 3D gyroscope signals to feed a CNN pulse. In handwriting, it's not that easy to see because it's not a spectrogram, but if we focus on the Z signal, which is how high is the pen while the patient is drawing, you see that before the patient to put the pen on the surface of the tablet, there is some movement. It was already documented almost 10 years ago by Drotar, a colleague in the Czech Republic. But here, it served us as a motivation because we could observe that, not only for an intermediate state patient, but also for a severe state patient. And this is one thing. The other thing is when we observe pressure, we can see that once the patient puts the pen on the surface of the tablet, the pressure starts to behave abnormal compared to A and B cases. So we found also, we thought, okay, so maybe there is also information here in this transition. So we focus on it, and then we created a very basic CNN-based architecture. For speech and gait, it was based on spectrograms, and for handwriting, it was based on raw time series. And we configured the network. If you want to see details of all of the configuration, you can see this paper, which was published almost 10 years ago, or I mean, no, 6 years ago. But the interesting thing is that when we compared single modality results with the fusion of onsets, we found a very high accuracy. Of course, the size of the corpus here is not that high, so there could be some bias because of, that when you do deep learning, then you maybe you better make sure that the size of your corpus is representative enough of your phenomena. But in any case, there is a clear indication of information when you fuse, when you merge different information in the transitions. Now let me show you transitions in the facial expressions. In this case, we used the BGG phase 2 data set for face recognition, and for facial expressions, we used EmotionNet, and for Parkinson's, we used what we call FacePark JITA, which is a corpus that we collected on our own. Details can be found in this paper. And in this case, the first thing we did was to annotate the data according to the transitions, while the person was asked to produce specific expressions, like to smile or to look as mad or things like that. So we annotated this with a software called Affectiva. And so the initial part is called the neutral part, then the onset part, then the apex is when it is kind of stable, and then the offset, and then the neutral, trying to imitate the same transitions as the ones as I showed you in speech, gait, and handwriting. In this case, we are comparing one patient in an initial state of the disease versus one patient in a very advanced stage of the disease. So that's why the curve is more unstable. So the first experiment was the natural one, using just face recognition, and using BGG phase 2 to train a ResNet 50 network and a support vector machine to test. FacePark JITA was only used to adjust or to tune the parameters of the SVM to find the final classification algorithm. And we found this 72.9 result in the onset picture. So these was pictures of the patient. And then we said, okay, now our hypothesis is that there is information in the process of the dynamics of the transition. Then we put it together, the images of the neutral, onset, apex, offset, and neutral, and so on. And then we evaluated all of the possible combinations of all of these videos, because in that case that were already videos, and then we jumped by 6%, doing just an early fusion. We didn't dig into whether doing it late fusion, intermediate fusion. Transformers were not out there in those days, that popular. So we stopped there, and then we said, okay, and what if we do transfer learning? Because if we are trying to model whether a person is able to actually produce the expression, then why not to do transfer learning from a ResNet model, able to recognize all of these different action units in the face. And then we tried freezing the model into the 50% of the network, 75% of the network, or the whole network as a baseline. We did that, and the best result was found when we freeze 75% of the network. And so these are the equal error rates for all of the action units. So we stick to this, and then based on this, we retrain our model, and then we jumped 9% of accuracy with respect to the first experiment. So there is definitely information in these transitions. Now, the task that is still to do is to come up with models easily transferable to clinical practice. Okay, now let me go back to speech and language analysis. If there is no questions regarding facial expression and other transitions. If you have any question, okay. Okay, now for speech and language analysis, following the same idea of finding interpretable models, we said, okay, we need to find, if we come back to the speech, how we model speech, in the beginning, I showed you that we were using, let me go back just to make it clearer. We were using phonation, articulation, prosody, and intelligibility. If you think of a clinic, you ask a neurologist about all of these concepts, and of course they will say, yes, I know about it. And then you ask them, would you be able to evaluate these concepts in Parkinson's patients? And then they would say, no, because I'm not an expert on it, or I don't have enough time, or I didn't receive enough training on that. So I would refer the patient to go to a speech and language therapist. So thinking of it, we said, okay, maybe if we show a patient and a clinician, neurologist or speech and language therapist, the result of modeling specific phonemes such that they could be grouped according to place and mode of articulation, for instance, or different, there is different ways of grouping the phonemes. Maybe they will be more open to use the technology. So then we thought of creating what is called a sequence-to-sequence model, in this case based on gated recurrent units. So we trained the system based on log-mel energies, and then we trained two bidirectional GRUs. And then in the end, what we got was the probability of a certain phoneme to be quote-unquote correctly produced. So we trained a network with a set of reference healthy speakers. In this case, we took a corpus from Mexico, because we don't have Colombian Spanish for that, but so we took Mexican Spanish, which is not that far from what we speak regarding the phonological space. And then based on that, we were able to measure the probability of each phoneme to be correctly classified or produced. So we obtained curves like this. So whether the person was producing vocalic sounds, stop sounds, nasal, strident, and so on. And the left side is for a healthy control, and the right side is for a patient. you can see that the regularity is different, impaired actually. And the accuracy in general that we obtained was the 80% classifying PD patients versus healthy controls, with the advantage of being clinically interpretable. And also, if you create a software program for patients, you can easily associate stop production with the movement of the tongue or the lips or the velum for the nasals and so on. So there is ways to explain them what is going on with their speech production. Now, regarding language production, there is some relatively new concept, which is the granularity and the semantic variability. What is it? If you take a model like, let's say, fast text, which is has the advantage of considering not only the information at the word level, but also at a phoneme level. And then if there is an unknown word in the corpus, then the system is somehow able to create unknown words. And then that variability that could happen for a patient suffering from Parkinson's disease will give you or could give you information about whether the person is actually producing the words in a proper way. The same concept has been used for Alzheimer's, because if you analyze granularity, let me detail this example. A control person will say, okay, the cook was in the kitchen and took a knife. Good, a lot of details. But if you ask a patient with Parkinson's disease, they would say something like, the man was in a room and took some cutlery. Okay, some detail. This is typical from a patient with Parkinson's disease who already started to suffer some language production impairment. Remember the Wernicke's area in the brain. And then if you ask a patient with Alzheimer's disease, then the details will vanish totally. So they would say something like, someone was in a place and took, what was that? Something, okay? So all of this granularity and semantic variability can be modeled using LLMs, like fast text. Another concept that could be used to interpret language models is the semantic granularity, which in this case is there is a corpus of different concepts in each language. Those are public. When you name an animal, you can say, okay, this is a living thing. Okay. Or you can say, this is an animal. Or you can say, oh, this is a carnivore. Or you can also say, no, this is a felon. Or you can say, no, it's a canine. Or you can say, it's a dog. Or it's a bulldog. All of these level of granularity can be measured based on the language produced by the patients. And that would open new avenues for, with real interpretation of what is going on in the brain. There is a question here. Have you considered using SSL features instead of MLCCs to increase performance? Yes, we have done experiments on that. But the thing is that, as I said in the beginning, we mainly push for interpretable results. And so far what we have observed is comparable results. So we couldn't find any, let's say, good reason to move to using SSL features rather than, let's say, interpretable approaches. If you notice, because if you ask me about interpretation of MFCCs, there is also a lot of questions about it, right? But that's why we not only rely on MFCCs when modeling speech, we also rely on other concepts like the phoneme production, timing, speech rate, and so on. If I answer your question. Okay, so there is different dimensions that can be modeled in language. So lexicosemantics relates to the words that are formed by the person and are able to create a concept regarding the context around the task. But also the morphosyntax is how the patient is able to properly put together different words in the proper hierarchy. to produce a message. And also, if we want to model at discourse level, then we can produce how much information is being produced in the whole context or in the whole message of the person. Okay, now we wanted to model cognitive decline in Parkinson's patients. So this is something that is less studied because it's hard to get. I mean, to find PD patients is hard, and to label those PD patients once we found them, according to whether their cognitive is impaired or not, is even harder. So for that, we had access to a corpus with 40 patients and 40 healthy controls, and within these 40 patients, 16 of them started already suffering from what is called mild cognitive impairment, which is the starting point of a dementia. And 24 of them were not with MCI. Those are according to what is called the mini-mental examination test. So we modeled them according to articulation, prosody, and phonemic identifiability, which is the probability of each phoneme to be correctly produced. So we obtained the models. Now let me go back to the task. In this case, for that corpus, the patients were asked to read a text loud and then to retell the story. And there were two stories, one with a lot of action verbs and the other one with a lot of non-action verbs. For those who may be not familiar with it, action verbs are something like running, jumping, and so on, writing. And non-action verbs are like reading, thinking, which are not related to action, physical actions. Now, when we did the classification, we found these results. Notice that in general, Parkinson versus healthy controls, then the best result was with the articulation model. Okay, we already knew that. Then, when we only focus on non-MCI patients, that means only those showing motor impairment, but nothing about cognitive decline, then still articulation. So articulation was definitely focused on modeling motor impairment. But then when we moved to whether the person has Parkinson's and MCI versus healthy control, then phonemic identifiability was the best. And then we said, okay, it is probably a confounding factor because there is also more people here, more impaired here, people here. Then we excluded them and focused only on patients. Patients with only motor impairment and patients with cognitive decline. And then phonemic identifiability was the best and was even above 70%. So here we are classifying patients versus patients. So this opened a new hypothesis regarding, okay, probably the planning for producing correct phonemes is being impaired and is even more impaired when the patient started to suffer from dementia or a mild cognitive impairment. So, of course, this is a hypothesis based on this evidence, but more experiments are necessary to clarify this question. Okay, now we wanted to dig into the language production of this corpus, so the same corpus, and then we consider the same two texts, action text and non-action text, and we introduced what is called proximity to reference semantic field. And we just, for comparison purposes, we use GLOB just to compare because that was just requested by the reviewer of the journal. Okay, so the model consisted as follows. So we have retelling stories, action and non-action. Remember that they had to read texts with a lot of action verbs versus texts with non-action verbs. So they read two of them and then they retold the stories. So we took apart each subject one by one, and the remaining texts were here. Then we created a vector representation for all of the words. And we found by post-tagging which were verbs and which were not verbs. So we had all of verbs and all of the words. And then we measured the importance of the verbs according to the weight found here in the latent semantic analysis. And then we did the product regarding the verb frequency produced by the test patient and the verb importance, and then we created the matrix, what we called proximity to reference semantic field. So trying to measure whether the patient is producing important verbs in the motor case or important verbs in the non-motor case, things like that. And these were the results. For the action text, we obtained good results when classifying Parkinson's and healthy controls, and also non-MCI versus healthy controls, so motor. It makes sense because the task was mobile. But if you observe for the non-action texts, the classification with the same system was not as good. So that means the task is working. So, and that is a message. If you want to model, in this case, for instance, Parkinson's disease, you have to adapt the tasks that you record in order to capture the parameters that you want to find, the symptoms that you want to model. Now, if you observe the results for the non-MCI patients versus the MCI patients, action verbs were the ones that really classify them. So in this case, that means that the task with a lot of action-related verbs is giving us the difference between the two patients groups. So now let me summarize. If there is no questions regarding what I have shown, what do you think is the best spoken task to have patients do for evaluation? Well, it depends. I mean, if you want to incorporate this cognitively related evaluation, definitely the retelling. Now, within the retelling space, let's say, there is different options, because you can ask the patient to retell a story rich on action verbs or non-action verbs, but you can also ask the patient to retell stories with a lot of emotions. And then you can evaluate other things. So it depends what you want to measure, right? So, but in principle, yes, the tasks are definitely sensitive to the pattern that you want to find. Okay, so some summary and outlook. So in movement, definitely the transitions give information about several symptoms in Parkinson's disease. The multimodal approach in general allows us to understand better different symptoms in Parkinson's, but there is a lot of space to explore. The reason why I didn't show combination of different modalities is because all of the works that we have done on that are still under review. But of course, I'm sure that most of you are thinking of transformers, attention mechanisms, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, that's the way to go, I think. Now, in phase, even though we found interesting results, there is still a lot to do if you want to fully incorporate the dynamics, and even to combine video with speech production. And then for that, there is different approaches, like recurrent units or 3D convolutions and other things, including transformers, of course. Now, which has to do with the synchronous fusion. And finally, another problem, which is the bigger compared to all of the ones that I have shown here today, is, okay, you can have a lot of good ideas, but there is a lack for data. There is not enough data to train good systems or to claim strong conclusions. Now, one of the possibilities to do it is to talk to colleagues around the world and to work in what is called federated learning approaches. This is one of the possibilities, because it is not that easy to share the data from your patients from one country to another country, or even within one city. I cannot share my data to a colleague who has his office just across the road. So that is also an open question that has to be addressed, I think. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for a great talk. I would like to ask the audience if you have any questions, please raise your hand or ask them in the chat so we will go through them.
Yeah, there is a comment regarding maybe a lip reading. We did it already, and the results are, let's say, decent. But what we found even better was to focus on the cheek movement, in the case of Parkinson's disease, at least.
So I think Hiba, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for providing us with the data set because I was able to use it for my master's thesis research. I have two questions. So the first question is that do you think UPDRS score is not suitable to study the severity of the disease when we use speech as a biomarker? And the second question is, did you get a chance to look at the sex differences in the performance? So did you study, for example, the performance on men only and women only?
Okay, so the first one, no, I think UPDRS is, or no, let me say it differently. We are engineers, unless there is some clinician here, I don't know. But in general, we are engineers trying to solve problems. And the way I see it is we solve the problem that the community give us. So we cannot say that, okay, what you are doing as a neurologist is not useful for what I want to do with speech. This is not how it works, right? They want to continue using MFDS and PDRS because it is sensitive in clinic, and this is what they have been using for decades. So having said that, I think UPDRS is suitable, but not as sensitive as we expect. So now what I push for doing it is to continue using UPDRS, but to take note of all of these items that the neurologists mark when doing the UPDRS. So the sub-items, I mean. So upper limbs, lower limbs, control of the leg, control of the top, of the fingers, and so on. And then you can see in sub-scales whether the model that you are working with is sensitive to that or not. This is one thing. And then once you do that and show that there is some sensitivity regarding the clinical evaluation, then you can incorporate additional tools like the MFDA scale that we introduced. Now, the step that is still missing from our side is that we need to do the statistical and clinical validation in a clinical trial with the MFDA scale. Once you do that, then the scale is validated and then it can be used in clinical practice. So there is a long way to do. Now, the second question was about, I forgot it. Sorry.
It's like sex differences. Like, did you study the performance of men only?
I think we did something many years ago, but I definitely remember some work from Juan Ignacio Godino. I will type his name here. He's a colleague from Madrid. Juan Ignacio Godino. He definitely did several experiments separating sex, and he found some interesting results. I don't remember which one was the one that differed the most regarding Parkinson's, but he definitely found interesting results on that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think Mirko, do you want to just go ahead and ask?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I just have a very general question here. Based on your experience, do you think how do you think speech will be used in Parkinson? Do you think it will be used to predict early symptoms, or it will be better used like to monitor the symptoms over time?
Good question. It can be used for both, according to what we have observed. Now, the problem is how to train the first case, the early detection, let's say, right? So that's why if you probably know about Jan Rus, right? I will type his name here. Jan Rus from Czech Republic in Prague. He has been working with REM patients. REM means random eye movement. So once you are diagnosed with REM, chances of you to develop Parkinson's disease are much higher than for a regular person. So he has access to patients with REM, and then he already showed that there is information. There is patterns in their speech production. This is one way of approaching the problem. The thing is that this way is very expensive, because to be diagnosed with REM, then you have to go and get a polysomnography. For those who maybe don't know about it, you have to go to the clinic, or you can stay at home, but definitely you have to wear a hat to get your EEG signal, electroencephalography signal, plus other signals of your body, plus the video of you while sleeping. And then if something abnormal happens, then you are diagnosed. I don't know details about what exactly, but I know the process. This is one way of approaching the early detection. Another way of approaching the early detection is to record people with a very high genetically related chance of developing Parkinson's disease. And for that, the places to do that are Israel and Colombia. Actually here, the region in which I am living. Because there is already evidence of a lot of genetically related Parkinson's disease patients, and also Alzheimer's disease patients. But for that, you need to start recording people and wait until the actual symptoms to happen.
Yeah, that's super cool. Actually, related to that, what do you think about this recent data set that came out about celebrities before and after Parkinson? Do you think they can be useful somehow?
Yeah, I know what you were referring to. Somehow, yes, to some extent, let's say. The problem with that is that they are claiming on their own that they were diagnosed. So there is any clinical evidence regarding what is going on, right? So the only thing you can do is to classify whether they have or not the disease. That's it. And there will be some remaining questions. So was the person really sure of being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease? Or was it a mixed diagnosis? Because there is a high rate of misdiagnosis, actually. Parkinson's disease can be confused with essential tremor, or also with a spinal. There is a spinal-related disease that creates or generates freezing of gait. So the misdiagnosis rate is very high in Parkinson's disease. So yeah, it's a corpus that you can use to play with, but not. I wouldn't trust on what I'm observing with that corpus.
Yeah,
if I'm thinking of
maybe
transferring to clinical
you're right.
practice.
You should accept that there's noise there, and maybe do not test on this data set, but just test on a clinically validated data set like your one or others, something like that, right?
Yeah, things like that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot for the talk, and thank everyone for joining. Just as a reminder, next week we won't have a meeting because of the NeurIPS conference, but on December 11th we will be back. We have a talk from Tatiana from Apple talking about low latency conversational agent. Thank you everyone for joining, and looking forward to meeting you in 2 weeks.